We all have this kind of mental map, right?
Right.
About how the world works.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, like, where does that map even come from?
Yeah.
And how can we trust, certain bits of it and maybe question others?
It's a really fundamental question. We all want to be informed, don't we? But without feeling totally overwhelmed by just everything.
Exactly. Drowning in data.
Precisely. And, we're constantly swimming in information, trying to figure out, okay, what's reliable? What should I actually believe?
Uh-huh.
So today we thought we'd explore the basic methods and tools we actually use to build that map.
Okay.
We're drawing on an essay that uses the IB theory of knowledge framework, but applies it to some really interesting modern examples.
Okay, so the mission here for this deep dive, it's not just listing the tools, is it? It's seeing them in action. Like, how do they actually work when we're trying to figure stuff out in the real world?
Spot on how it all plays out practically.
Okay, so let's unpack this toolkit then. The essay mentions a few core ways we get knowledge. What are the main ones?
Well, it breaks it down into about 5 key things. There's perception, basically, what our senses tell us.
Seeing, hearing, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Then memory, how we store and recall stuff. Reason, our ability to think logically, connect the dots.
Makes sense.
Then there's intuition, that gut feeling, that immediate sense of knowing something.
Yes. Intuition.
And finally, testimony, which is basically everything we learn from other people. So each one plays a pretty vital role.
Okay, but this isn't just theory, right? The essay gives a great example of how these all sort of meshed together recently. Something about NASA and Mars.
Oh, yeah, that's a perfect case study. So in 2023, NASA used their InSight lander.
Wait, the one on Mars?
Yep. And they got the most precise measurements ever of Mars's core, its liquid iron core.
Wow.
Well, think about the toolkit. The lander had a seismometer, that's perception, right?
Yeah.
It sensed these tiny seismic waves going through the planet.
Okay.
That raw data then got stored in huge cloud databases. That's like a massive digital memory.
A collective memory, almost.
Exactly. Then scientists use really complex physics models, mathematical reasoning, to figure out what those waves meant about the core.
Ah, connecting the dots.
Right. And then, crucially, it wasn't just accepted. The findings went through intense scrutiny and, testimony from scientists all over the world. Peer review, basically.
So what's really jumping out at me here is it wasn't just one method. It wasn't just the seismometer or just the math.
No, not at all.
It was this whole interplay.
Yeah.
Observation, data, logic, getting confirmation from others.
Yeah.
That's how we got this picture of another planet's core.
Precisely. It shows how these ways of knowing, they don't exist in isolation. They often work together, and that's where the real power lies.
It's the great takeaway, the synergy, as you said. Okay, so once we have some information, maybe a claim someone makes, how do we decide if it's actually any good? Like, what's a good reason to believe something?
Yeah, that's the next big question. The essay suggests 3 main things to look for: evidence, coherence, and the source's reliability.
Okay, so evidence is like, is there actual proof?
Right. Coherence is about, does this new idea fit with other things we already know or believe? Does it make sense in the bigger picture? And source reliability, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Can we trust the person or organization telling us this?
And the essay uses another recent example for this one, doesn't it? Something about aspartame, the sweetener.
Yeah, the World Health Organization classification in 2023, they labeled aspartame as possibly carcinogenic.
Right, I remember that. That caused a stir.
It did. And the WHO looked at different kinds of evidence. There were some limited studies suggesting maybe a link in people, some lab studies on animals.
Okay, different types of evidence.
And of course, an expert panel reviewed it all. That's the source reliability and testimony part again.
But then didn't another WHO committee immediately say the safe daily intake levels were still okay? That seems confusing.
It does seem contradictory on the surface, yeah.
Possibly causes cancer, but go ahead and drink your diet soda.
Well, this really highlights the reasoning part and weighing the evidence. The first committee found some grounds to flag a potential hazard, hence possibly.
Okay.
But the second committee looked at the strength of that evidence, how consistent it was, and decided that at the levels most people consume, the risk was still considered low.
So it's about the degree of risk and the certainty of the evidence.
Exactly. It's nuanced. And for you, the listener, it shows that evaluating claims isn't just yes or no. You have to look at the type of evidence, the strength, the limitations. It's complex.
Right. It's not always black and white. Okay, so we're getting this picture. We have tools to get knowledge, criteria to check it. But what about the tools themselves? are things like intuition and evidence and, expert opinion,
Hmm.
are they all equally convincing or equally reliable?
That's such a key question, and the short answer, according to the essay, is no. They're not equal. Each has its own strengths, but also its own weaknesses.
How so?
Well, take intuition. It can be incredibly fast, really insightful sometimes, but it's also notoriously prone to biases, right?
Yeah, definitely. We feel something is right, but maybe it isn't.
Exactly. Evidence, on the other hand, grounds us in reality, in facts. But evidence can be incomplete or it can be interpreted in different ways.
Okay.
Reasoning is powerful, but only if your starting points, your premises, are actually correct. Garbage in, garbage out, basically.
Makes sense.
Consensus, what the group agrees on, can be reassuring, a good check, but it can also lead to groupthink, right? It can shut down new
The
ideas.
dreaded groupthink.
And authority. Well, trusting experts is often efficient, a necessary shortcut. But experts can be wrong, or maybe they have their own agendas. There's always a risk.
So it's a trade-off with each one. The essay uses an AI example here, right, in healthcare.
Yes, the 2024 UC San Diego Health Study, they looked at an AI tool designed to predict sepsis, which is a life-threatening condition.
Okay, high stakes.
Very. And initially, you might see doctors react in different ways. Some might rely heavily on their own intuition, their years of experience, maybe being skeptical of the AI.
Right. I know sepsis when I see it.
Or others might be tempted to just trust the authority of this fancy new AI, maybe follow its recommendations without question.
Okay, extremes.
But the study found the best results, the biggest improvements for patients, happened when the teams didn't just rely on one thing, they blended it all.
How did that work?
They used the real-time evidence from the AI, like vital signs, trends. They applied their clinical reasoning to interpret the AI's risk scores. They discussed cases, building consensus within the team. And they had some confidence because the AI itself had been validated through peer review. That's authority and community checks again.
So it's like using all the tools together intelligently.
Exactly. It's sometimes called epistemic pluralism, basically, valuing different ways of knowing and using them appropriately, not putting all your eggs in one basket.
That really makes you think about times maybe you've leaned too hard on just one way of knowing something. Because this next one really grabbed me. Does knowledge always need a rational basis? What about just knowing?
Yeah, this gets into what's called tacit knowledge, or sometimes embodied knowledge. It's that practical skill, that know-how, that you can't always easily explain in logical steps.
Like riding a bike. You just do it.
Sorta, yeah.
Yeah.
Or think about an expert craftsman or an athlete. The essay uses Captain Sullenberger, the pilot who landed the plane on the Hudson River in 2009.
Oh, wow. The miracle on the Hudson. That was incredible. Pure instinct, it seemed like.
Well, that's the interesting part. After the accident, they ran simulations. And technically, a purely rational approach trying to follow the checklist procedures to get back to an airport might have worked.
Really?
But only if the pilots reacted almost instantaneously with perfect information, no delays, which wasn't the reality of the situation.
Right. Birds hit the engines. Total chaos. Split seconds to decide.
Exactly. And the investigators concluded that, given the extreme time pressure, Sullenberger's intuition, which was built on thousands of hours of flying, his deep experience, that was actually the optimal response. It saved lives.
So sometimes that deep, ingrained, almost subconscious knowledge is more valuable than trying to logically work through steps A, B, and C.
In certain high-pressure, real-world situations, absolutely. It shows knowledge isn't always about conscious, rational deliberation. Sometimes it's faster, more embodied.
Fascinating. Okay, so our experience, our intuition, it shapes things.
Yeah.
How much do our expectations and assumptions actually change what we even see or notice?
A huge amount. This is the idea that perception isn't passive. It's theory-laden, as they say. Meaning what we already believe, what we expect, what we're trained to look for, it acts like a filter on what information actually gets through.
Okay.
This leads to things we've probably all experienced, like confirmation bias. We look for stuff that confirms what we already think.
Totally guilty of that.
We all are. And also something called inattentional blindness. That's where you can completely miss something obvious right in front of you just because you weren't expecting it. Culture, training, it all shapes these filters.
The essay mentions a study, the gorilla one, with radiologists.
Yeah.
That sounds wild.
Oh, it's a classic. And it perfectly illustrates this. Researchers took CT scans of lungs.
Okay, medical images?
Yep. And radiologists were asked to look through them, find signs of cancer, nodules, things like that. Standard task for them.
Right.
But The researchers digitally inserted a clear image of a gorilla, like a little picture of a gorilla waving into these scans.
I'm away. Gorilla in a lung scan.
Exactly. And the results were staggering. 83% of these expert radiologists failed to see the gorilla.
Even though they looked right at it.
Eye tracking showed they looked right at it. But because their brain, their professional schema, was so focused on looking for white nodules, they were effectively blind to this completely unexpected black gorilla.
Wow. It blows my mind every time I hear about it. It really makes you wonder what gorillas we're missing in our own lives because we're just not looking for them.
It's a powerful reminder of our own biases and perceptual filters.
Definitely. Okay, last main point from the essay. It talks about community, like getting other people to check our work. What are the pros and cons of needing that group verification?
Well, the big pro is error correction, right? Peer review, scholarly debate. Having other eyes look at something can catch mistakes, flawed reasoning, biases we missed ourselves. It builds trust and robustness.
Makes sense. Safety in numbers, kind of.
To an extent. But the essay also points out the potential downside. If there's too much emphasis on everyone agreeing, on consensus, it could potentially shut down really new, maybe radical ideas. Things that challenge the established view might get dismissed too easily.
Right, the lone genius struggling against the establishment kind of thing.
It can happen. Finding that balance is key.
Does the essay have an example for this one too?
It uses the reproducibility project in psychology. This was a huge effort, ran from about 2015 to 2023.
What did they do?
They tried to replicate the findings of 100 prominent studies published in top psychology journals to see if they could get the same results again.
Okay, a big reality check.
And they could only successfully replicate the original results in about 40% of the cases.
Oof. Only 40%. That sounds bad.
Well, it certainly caused a lot of discussion, even some alarm within psychology. A replication crisis, people called it.
I can imagine.
But here's the crucial part, the dialectic value the essay talks about. While it exposed a problem, maybe issues with methods, publication bias, whatever, it also led to solutions.
How so?
The field started adopting stricter practices, things like pre-registering their hypotheses before running the study, sharing their data more openly, focusing more on replication studies. So the community scrutiny, even though it revealed a weakness, ultimately pushed the field to become stronger, more reliable.
So the verification process, even when it's uncomfortable or reveals problems, is actually vital for making progress in the long run.
Exactly. That critical back and forth, that community oversight, is incredibly valuable, even essential for building robust knowledge.
Okay, that ties a lot together. So wrapping up this deep dive, what's the big picture message we should take away?
I think the main thing is that knowledge isn't simple. It's not one thing, and we don't get it through just one perfect method. It's this really complex, dynamic mix.
Yeah, of perception, memory, reason, intuition, testimony, all that stuff we talked about.
Right, and all of it is filtered through who we are, what we expect, our experiences. There's just no single best way to know everything.
So the skill isn't finding the magic bullet method.
No. The real skill, and the essay shows this so well with all the examples, is becoming more aware of the different tools in our own mental toolkit.
And knowing which tool to use when.
Exactly. Which tool or combination of tools is right for this particular question or this situation, and why? Understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
From figuring out Mars's core, to landing a plane, to deciding about a sweetener, or even spotting gorillas, it's about choosing the right tools for the job.
Precisely. And maybe the most useful thing for you listening right now is to just pause and think about that. Think about the methods and tools you tend to rely on most in your own life.
Yeah, what's your default setting?
Right. Is it always the best fit? Think about a time your gut feeling totally clashed with the hard evidence. Or maybe a time when what everyone else thought turned out to be completely off base.
Or maybe when that intuition saved the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just reflecting on those moments, that can tell you a lot about your own personal ways of knowing. And maybe help you navigate that flood of information just a little bit better.